One of the great wise men of the generation who passed away just not that long ago is Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. There's not that many people who can boast to have written in a running commentary on the entire Shas, as well as countless books of philosophy and a true chacham of the door. And in one of the books that was published not by Rabbi Steinsaltz himself, but by his right-hand man, Arthur Kurzweil, who started as his driver and ended up being his, Yehoshua to the Moshe, who edited a number of his books and put out a number of his own books. So he put out a small collection called Pebbles of Wisdom from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, which is just a collection of various different short talks or, other pieces of Steinsaltz's writing or.
Guys, that's another shiur. Really?
Yeah, it's a different shiur. Cover the tiger. Way to go. Anyway, Steinsaltz said, it sounds like he was writing. In fact, it doesn't say it here, but he wrote this in a journal of mathematics. He was a strange genius of a man. Anyway, he wrote as an anecdote in the middle of this journal. I had a friend. He was older than me, but for a time I became his teacher. He was on a long path to religion, and it was for him a way of suffering. At one point, I told him about procession caterpillars. They go in a line, one after the other. You see a whole line of them, each touching the other, and they're going in a procession. Perhaps they're searching for food. Biologists experimented with them, and one experiment had most political implications. One caterpillar leads, the others follow. Why is the leader a leader? What made him into being a leader? They found out that the leader's a leader because each has an instinctive feeling to follow the tail of another caterpillar. Now, there was one caterpillar who didn't find the tail, so he became the leader by default. So that's the leader, the one that didn't find the tail. And in order to prove it, they did something that was in a way unkind. They arranged them in the form of a circle, the first caterpillar touching the last. They work by instinct, and so they walk in a circle, and they go like this until they die. Always in the same circle. And I said to my friend that sometimes people go in this kind of circle in their spiritual life. And the only way to solve it is to cut it. You have to cut the caterpillar-like circle by will, and then you may go in any direction. The circle means death, moving but staying in the same place. There are people who lead that sort of life for years, and I'm not just speaking in a material way of life, but spiritual as well. A person has all kinds of driving impulses, but no solution. You come to the same questions, the same answers, and so you move in a circle, you don't move anywhere. Rabbi Nachman in Likutei Moharan Torah Memhei, in the second volume of Rabbi Nachman's magnum opus, has a very short piece where he discusses the pasuk from Tehillim, Saviv Rishayim Yishalechum, that the way of those who are lost. Now, Rasha doesn't mean that you're evil. Rasha just means that you're lost. If you were evil, you would be Ra. But a Rasha, the Zohar already says, is not evil. It's a person who, the shin in the Rasha, which is an allusion to the avos and the imos, the three-headed shin, the four-headed shin, three avos, the four imos, is precluded by the Ra on the outside. Rishayim Saviv Yishalechum. Rishayim are stuck in this circle. And because they're always surrounding the nakuda that they're trying to get to, because they're always they keep kind of circling the wagons, but they're never quite entering into that innermost point of what they wish their deepest relationships were. Relationships with other righteous people, tzaddikim, as Rabbi Nachman's talking about in the piece, locally. Relationships with people in their families, relationships with Hashem, relationships with themselves, always kind of like hanging out on the outside, but never quite willing to go inside. There's something that's stopping them from going into that innermost point. And as long as they're stuck in this circle, they're stuck in this merry-go-round, Paradoxically, Rabbi Nachman, who's the master of hope, wants us to understand that as long as we're still on that circle, it's true that the caterpillars and we sometimes are stuck in these circles, but as long as we're still on the proverbial merry-go-round, as long as we're going around and around and around, there's still the possibility that we may enter into the Nekuda Pnimis. Afilu Poshe Yisrael, even sinners, even people who are completely lost, Kol Zman Shelo Yatzam Na'igulim, so long as we're still in these circles, Adayin Yesh Lo Tikva L'Skarvel Nekuda Pnimis. But a person who's already left that circle, then it's not possible for that person to draw near anymore. So we see that there's this notion of circles of death. There's a notion of circles of death, this concept of Rishayim, Saviv Yishalechun. Those who are wandering in circles and haven't been able to find their way to the inside. And that at the same time, there's something redemptive about this circle of staying within this sphere as the dreidel of life continues to spin around. And so what I want to speak about just for a few moments this evening, Hashem's help, with your permission, is a passage that we find, really it goes back to the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah is one of the oldest books of Jewish philosophy, of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah, that is attributed to Avram Avinu. And the Sefer Yetzirah is made up very much in the same way that Mishnayos are made up. And that is, there are Prakim and there are Mishnayos. There's Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Beis, Mishnah Gimel, and in the fifth Perek, Mishnah Tes, already the fifth Perek is dealing with 12 letters of the Aleph Beis and how they correspond to the different months of the year. What about the other 10 letters? There's 22 letters in the Aleph Beis, not only 12. So we're in chapter 5 already, so the first 4 chapters, I and Shem about those other 10 letters. So the Sefer Yetzirah attributes different letters to the different months of the year, which is obviously, I mean, it's a work of Kabbalah. It sounds like a very esoteric type of idea, but I don't like esotericism. I like to try to make things something that we can actually sink our teeth into. And so the Sefer Yetzirah suggests that these different letters correspond to the different months, and that there's something that we can actually understand of this connection. So for example, the letters Hey and Kuf correspond to Nisan and Adar, Ches and Tes correspond to Tammuz and Av. The letter Samach, as the Sefer Yetzirah says, brought down in the Sefer B'nai Yissaschar, one of the classic Sfarim, the Rebbe of Tzvi Elimelech of Din, of one of the classic Sefer Chasidus, that actually, I mentioned this probably a number of times over the years. This Sefer is probably single-handedly responsible for a lot of my own relationship with Torah, in the sense that it was this particular Sefer and the way that this Sefer kind of unpacks some of these ideas that drew my dear father close to Talmud Torah, to learning. My father's an eye doctor, but was very much enamored by the Sefer B'nai Yissaschar. He had a Jewish education, but was, searching for his entrance point to the Nekuda Pnimis, and found it in the Sefer B'nai Yissaschar. So it's hard for me to read the Sefer without saying thank you, because it's so much influenced my father and by extension my entire family's derech halimud, way of study. The Sefer Yetzirah says that Himlich Os Samach, that the letter Samach was kind of given a position of royalty, of rulership over the month of Kislev. That somehow the letter Samach relates to the month of Kislev. Of course, the letter Samach is a circle. So our introduction about these circles of life and circles of death are very much chanukah. I think the title of the shiur, I told Avi, felt bad every week he's chasing me for a title, and I'm always elusive. So I just said, why don't we just make it insights into, and then whatever month we happen to be in, you can put it in, and that's what we'll do for the next number of months, or however long this lasts. So there's circles of life and there's circles of death, and Chanukah and the whole month of Kislev is very much related to this Indian of Samach. So we've spoken a little bit about the circles of death, and the truth is that there's what to talk about more about that. But first, I think it's kedai to maybe just introduce the notion of these circles of life. Every letter that corresponds to a different month, and all the other kochos that correspond to a different month, there are a number. There is a constellation that corresponds to the different months. In Mazal Yisrael, that's true. There's no, we're not bound by the mazalos. But as the Shem Yishmuel quotes from his father in many different places, Rashi already says in the Gemara, in Mazal Yisrael, that's because Al Yidei Tefillah and Maisim Tovin, we can be mahapech them. The Jewish people have the ability to kind of manipulate, be in the driver's seat. It's not that there are no mazalos and that the mazalos aren't real. It's that we're not really so afraid of them because after all, we have Tefillah and Maisim Tovim in order to be the Bailim over the mazalos, just like we're the Bailim over many other things. That's what the Torah means when it says that we are Bina Le'itim. Will be known amongst the nations of the world as those who are wise and understanding in the ways of the itim of the times. And so in many places the Shem Yishmuel quotes from his father the idea that Ein Mazal Yisrael means Dine Kfar Kasev Avi Adoni Mori Vizikeni. My father and my grandfather have already said that the Yud Beis Mazalos, the 12 constellations, and by extension, again, I'm just kind of borrowing the idea. The same thing is true of these letters, which seem to somehow have a power over the different months, or somehow are attempting to explain to us what we're trying to do in these different months. That the fact that we say Ein Mazal Yisrael Af, Sham Mazal Moshech B'Tivul L'Dvarim Bilti Ruyim, even though there's the possibility of each of these mazalos, and by extension, these different letters and various different functions of the body. One month has to do with eating, another month has to do with sleeping, Kislev has to do with sleeping. Each of these things pulls the body in different directions, but the Jewish people are kol kulo capable of overcoming these things and using them to our own advantage. And so the letter Samach and the circle of the letter Samach, which is attempting to keep us on this merry-go-round where we just follow the leader, we follow the caterpillars until we cease to exist, is something that we can actually learn to utilize for our own reasons. So on the one hand, the Gemara tells us in Masech Shabbos, that the time period for lighting the chanukah candles, the appropriate time for lighting the chanukah candles is Shkia Sacham. That lighting the chanukah candles, the Gemara says in Masech Shabbos, that a person should come and light the chanukah candles mishetishka chama ad shetichla regel min hashuk. And the simple interpretation of what that means, the Gemara has a whole discussion about that. Does that mean to say that this is telling me something about is that a time period I'm supposed to be lighting? Is that telling me something about how much oil I need to have in my candle? Does this imply that if I lit the candle and then the candle went out, so kavsa zakukla, that when the candle goes out, I have an obligation to light it again? So the Gemara has a whole discussion about this concept and settles on the idea that ad shetichla regel min hashuk is just, it's a time period. We're supposed to light the chanukah candles so that they should last for approximately a half hour, which we define as from the time the sun sets until basically about a half hour later, people have until the feet have left the marketplace. However, already the Chidush Harim, the first Ger Rebbe, explained that if you look in the Mishnah Berurah, for example, you look in, you always see there are people who are very nervous about this. There's not really any reason to be. I mean, we'll leave it for the Dayan to maybe he'll give a share on it, but there's not really a reason to be nervous. Bizman Hazeh, the Iker Prisumei Nisa is for the house anyway, and as long as there's somebody up in the house, and it could even very well be that the Iker Prisumei Nisa is for ourselves. There's not really an end time for lighting the Chanukah candles, and so, of course, l'chatchila we try to light it close to Shkia. Some people are makbid specifically to wait till Tzeitzei Kochavim, but we could save that for a halacha shir. The time for lighting the candles is from Shkia, ideally from Shkia. And the Ad Shetichla Regel Min Hashuk can be understood not as a time period for when we should ideally light the candles until, or how much oil we should have so that it should last for a half hour, but rather is telling us something of the reason that what is the goal? What are we trying to affect by lighting the candles? And so the Neiros Chanukah are lit, Misha Tishkach, from the time that the sun sets, ad until it brings about the purpose of lighting those candles, which is Shetichla Regel Min Hashuk, says the Chidush Harim in just no much more than just a few words. Shal Yedei Ner Chanukah, that by way of the Neiros of Chanukah, Misbatel HaRegilus, At Shetichla Regel Min Hashuk, the word Tichla is a funny word to use in a halachic sense, which is probably what's tipping off the Chidush Harim in the first place. It's a very famous idea found in the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, in the students of the Baal Shem Tov, that tichla regel, the word tichla comes from a lashon of like kilyot by yechula shamayim, to come to the end of something, but it has an almost violent kind of connotation to it. When Eldad and Medad, the two young prophets, are prophesying in the camp that Moshe is going to die and Yeshua is going to bring the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, Moshe makes Yeshua machnes. So Yeshua says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe kalein, destroy them. Right? Vayechulu is a lashon of kaleim, of destruction. Until the feet are destroyed from the marketplace is it's a rather violent statement. And so the Chidush Harim understands the word regel not as the word feet, but as the word like regilut, regular, to shake things up a little bit. That the purpose of the Neiros Chanukah is somehow to, what Rav Steinsaltz described as cutting the caterpillar procession line, cutting that circle that we're on so that we can break the insane merry-go-round of just another day of waking up, another day of carpool, another day of shopping, another day of picking up the dry cleaning or doing the laundry or whatever the particular merry-go-round that we're on, another day of leaving the house and going to work and then coming home and having a meal, another day of going to sleep and another day of waking up. And the purpose of the Neiros Chanukah, we have to describe what that is. That's hopefully what we'll do in the next number of minutes, is to describe how it is and what it is that the menorah and the Neiros Chanukah are trying to do in order to, on the one hand, cut that circle and break the spell of that mazel of the letter Samach, which represents this Rishoim Saviv Yisalechun, Saviv Rishoim Yisalechun, that the Rishoim are sometimes stuck on this circle of going just without thinking in this robotic kind of trend of life. And at the same time, when we cut the circle, the Samach, the Tumah, when we cut that Samach, which is holding us back, there is the possibility of re-entering into a different Samach, which is the Samach that the Shemi Shmuel was describing, which is the Samach, the Kedusha, which is that Samach, which is somehow this circle of life. Cue the Lion King music. Not that circle of life. So let's see if we can try to understand what it is that is unique about this circle that is an ideal type of circle. And I guess one way of entering into this is a famous idea that is said over the name of the Vilna Gaon. In fact, it is the very last teaching in this very small but amazing work that I bought when I was 18 years old in Eretz Yisrael for the year, in my Shana Aleph year. The Sefer Kol Eliyahu, which is a collection of short ideas from the Vilna Gaon, usually taken from other works, not the Vilna Gaon's own pen, but things that I heard this from the Gra, I heard that from the Gra. It was very fashionable to write things in the Gra's name, so much so that there was a ban put at a certain point of like saying things in the name of the Gra unless you had manuscript proof that this was from the Gra. Everyone would just try to say their own chidushim and be like, yeah, the Gra said it, So this is the very last teaching of the Vilna Gaon found in the Sefer Kol Eliyahu. And if you've ever been to a siyum, there's a decent chance you've probably heard this Torah. The Gra writes that the word siyum is a unique word, and that the concept of a siyum speaks to this notion that when a person is at a siyum, there is a celebration of those who are involved in actually completing the Masechta, or completing a particular sefer, completing that order of study, and those who, although they were not necessarily there for the entire Daf Yomi cycle or whatever the particular Masechta is that's being finished, they were nevertheless very much in the background, supporting roles, whether that be a spouse or whether that be someone who's financing the project, or whether it be Ben, dishing out the cholent so that we can learn Torah together. When you have a learning project that comes to a conclusion, those who come to celebrate, who had nothing to do with with the learning itself, but are there to celebrate, the Vilna Gaon said that the word siyum kind of has this allusion to the notion that those who are there and those who are not there are both entitled to celebrate in the siyum. And that's because of all of the letters in the Aleph base, there are only 4 letters in the Aleph base. And you can check for yourself. There are only 4 letters in the Aleph base that when you spell the letter out completely, right? So every letter can be spelled out, with the exception of 2 letters. There's only one way to spell all the letters. So Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei, Beis is Beis Yud Taf. The letters Hey and Vav have alternate spellings in accordance with the mystical tradition, but all the other letters have only one way of spelling them. The only letters that when you spell out the letters, the inner letters of the letter and the outer letter, I'm going to explain what this means in a second for those who are lost, and the outer letter are the same. So for example, Samach is spelled Samach Mem Chaf Sofi. Samach has the numerical value of 60, and Mem and Chaf is 40 and 20 is 60. The same thing is true for the next letter, Si Yun. The next letter is Yud. Yud is 10. Yud is spelled Yud Vav Dalid. Vav and Dalid is 10. And then the other 2 are very obvious and very easy. Vav Vav is the same, and Mem Mem is the same. So that the inner letters of Siyum and the outer letters of Siyum, or as the Gra says it, the Samach HaNigla and the Samach HaNister, the Yud HaNigla and the Yud HaNister, that which is seen and that which is on the outside versus that which is on the inside, have the same numerical value, to allude to this idea that those who are actually making the Siyum, those who are behind the scenes kind of celebrating in the shadows, are also part and parcel of this celebration. So that's the way that the Gra says it, but we have permission to, I believe this is a base medrash, and the Gemara in Chagigah says, "Ein base medrash below Chodesh." One should not enter into base medrash without trying to say something novel. But I would suggest that maybe there's another level of understanding what the Vilna Gaon is getting at here, which is based on something that we find already in the writings of the Marshal and others in trying to understand what the nature of a siyum is. And the nature of a siyum is, of course, not the celebration of the completion of something, but rather the possibility that I can start it again, that I'll return back to this thing, and that I'll be able to see it with fresh eyes, with new eyes, and be able to draw something out of it that I didn't see the first time. And so the reason that the word siyum has the inner and outer letters that are corresponding to one another is that the siyum that I'm making now is hiding the siyum that I'll make next time, which is itself hiding the siyum that I'll make after that, which is hiding the siyum that I'll make after that ad infinitum, because Reb Chaim over there in Bnei Brak is still making siyum right and left, and he did it already, he finished it already. And yet, he's confident that every time he finishes it, he can start over again, and there's something to see, to be know it's so And so this already begins to express to us the possibility that the letter Samach offers us, which is that if we harness the letter Samach in the appropriate way, that what the Neirus of Chanukah are offering us is the possibility of coming back to the same thing over and over again, and the exact polar opposite of what the Samach de Tumah is, which is this sense of monotonous, kind of rote, mechanical merry-go-round. The Samach of Kedusha is the possibility of Chodesh every single time I come back. That there's the possibility that every single time I am going to start over again, every single time I come back to the Masechta that I did before, to that person that I left, to that relationship that I already experienced and thought that I understood it completely to the point that it's completely exhausted. There's the possibility that I can return to that with fresh eyes and start over again. And so, of course, this is the secret of what we find. The Gemara in Megillah says, the Mishnah, in the 3rd parak or the 4th parak of Megillah, depending on the Mishnah, it's 3rd parak, and the Gemara, it's reversed for some reason. It's in the 4th parak. The Mishnah says, in Parak Gimel Mishnah Vav, V'chanukah b'nistiyim. In the Mishnah that outlines the various different Mishnah, the various different Kriyas HaTorahs of the different Yamim Tovim of the whole year, so we find that B'chanukah b'nistiyim. That by Chanukah, the laning of Chanukah is specifically the laning of the Nisiyim. And anyone who's ever laned the Nisiyim or knows the Nisiyim, or if you've ever been in Shul when we were laning the Nisiyim, which is probably all of us, It's the same sukkim over and over and over again. It's Parshas Nasa. It's the longest parsha in the Torah. It's 172 sukkim, which mirrors the longest Masechta in Shas, which mirrors the longest number of psukim in Tehillim, 172 in Kuf Yotes. And the reason for that is that on Chanukah there is the possibility, through coming to the place of the Beis Hamikdash, which is this ultimate place of Chodesh, that a person who lights the Chanukah candles can has the ability to shake off the regilas, so much so that the ultimate expression of having shaken off the regular mundane kind of circle of death that so many people find themselves on, and I find myself on all the time, that Hanukkah comes to say that even in the circular aspects of life, the things that we keep coming back to over and over and over again, if in those things that are the routine, that are not the new things, we can somehow tichla regel min hashok, we can break the routine in those things which are already circular by nature, then ultimately we've discovered the means of elevating this samach in a way of kedusha. I was thinking this is also maybe the explanation. Many people are grappling with this. Kedusha Levi writes about this. Others write about this as well. The Gemara in Shabbos on Chaf Aleph and Beis, when it's dealing with what is Chanukah, my Chanukah, the famous Gemara that describes what is Chanukah. So the Gemara says, my Chanukah, it's 8 days. It's Timna Inun. It's 8 days where we celebrate the fact that the Yevanim nichnasu leheichal, they timu kol hashmonim. And when the Chashmonaim came in, they found a pach echad that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And that pach echad that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol ended up lasting for 8 days. And to celebrate that, we have the holiday of Hanukkah for 8 days. But then the Gemara says that when did they make this holiday of Hanukkah? So the Gemara says, Lishana acheres kavum. The next year, they waited a whole year. That next year, kavum v'asam yom tovim. It was only the following year when they came back to that day of Hanukkah that they decided that this is going to be a Yom Tov L'Doros. This is not just a one-time special event. We've had many miracles. There were miracles in the Beis Hamikdash, like the British writes. There were miracles in the Beis Hamikdash every single day. Many miracles in the Beis Hamikdash every single day. We don't have holidays celebrating each of these miracles. And so the British writes that what they saw is that when they came back to that same day that had happened the last time, they saw that whatever light, whatever feeling there was during the original Chanukah was still there the second time. So that it was revealed to them that Chazal said, it must be that there's something intrinsic about this day. This wasn't a fluke, but that, like we find in the context of Tisha B'Av and in the context of many other Yom Tovim, that Yom HaGarma, that the day itself caused something, there was something special about these days. But deeper than that is the idea that they waited L'Shana Acheres to see if it would be possible to come back to the very same time period again. And would it be possible in coming back to that same time period again to experience it like it was for the first time? That we weren't just coming back to that Yom Tov that we did this already. Right? Like the Maisa that Rav Chanan Wasserman was one time sitting in a Shiur. It's one of my favorite stories. Rav Chanan Wasserman is sitting in a Shiur and the Chafetz Chaim was giving Shiur. And some of the Bachrim who were second, third year students in Radin said, he gave this Shiur like 2 years, like he gave this Shiur last year. We heard this Shiur already, right? As happens to any Shana Bet, Shana Gimel, Shana Hay student. It's like, I heard the Rosh was on this already, I heard this already. And Rav Chanan Wasserman was sitting there kind of smiling to himself as, the Shiur was going on. And at the end of the Shiur, he got up and he looked at the guys who had said, you gave the Shiur already. And he said, he added 12 years, he added 12 words this year. Right? That for Rav Chanan Wasserman, the newness, the freshness, the ability to come back to the same thing and to hear something new, the ability to come back to something and for it to be as exciting as the first time, is the inyan of the samach kedusha, that when you break the regilas, the shuk is the place, the marketplace is the same thing, buying and selling, new inventory and then stocking it and then getting rid of it, being worried if it's going to go and then it goes, and that's that ebb and flow of the shuk. Shuk is the possibility of turning the circle of death itself into the circle of life, because there's the ability to find something new in it every single time. And so they waited l'shana acheres. So this we find specifically that the Yom Tov of Chanukah is somehow related to this Indian of they found the Pach Shemen of the Kohen Gadol. Now already many of the Achronim, it's not really discussed by the Rishonim, but you find many of the Achronim in the Gemara and Shabbos, Rabbi Kiva Eger and many others, asking the question that we know that the Kohen Gadol had certain jobs in the Beis Hamikdash. Kohen Gadol had specific roles in the Beis Hamikdash. Being chosem the oil in the Beis Hamikdash, that was not one of the jobs of the Kohen Gadol. So what is this chosem shel Kohen Gadol that they found on the oil? We'll finish up in a few minutes. The notion of the oil of the Kohen Gadol, that the Kohen Gadol is the one who put away this oil that will help us to light the Chanukah candles, and then maybe we can begin to taste some understanding of what it is that allows us to break that cycle. What is it about the neiros of Chanukah, which are the throwback to this Indian of the Kohen Gadol? What is it that allows us to break the cycle? So I think that if we go back to the original Kohen Gadol, and then go to the notion of the Kohen Gadol in general, we'll find something quite remarkable. There's a famous Rashi that gets a lot of press. There's a lot of people talking about this Rashi. Rashi writes in Parshas Ba'aloscha in the context of Aaron being introduced to the menorah for the first time and being told to light it. So after being instructed by Ba'aloscha Saneros that Aaron should light the candles day in and day out, the Yerushim Saneros, Pasuk Gimel says, "Vayas Kain Aaron," and Aaron did as he was told. Vayas Kain Aaron. Aaron followed the dictates of Moshe Rabbeinu, Al Pi Hashem B'Yad Moshe. And Rashi, who's obviously bothered by the fact that it says that Aaron, Vayas Kain Aaron. Since when is Aaron not in the habit of listening to the Navi Hador, to the Nasi Hador? And so Vayas Kain Aaron, Rashi explains, Vayas Kain Aaron, Lahagid Shivcho Shel Aaron Shalosh Shina. As if this is supposed to be an answer which makes the question better. To tell us the praise of Aaron that he did not change anything that Moshe Rabbeinu said. Moshe said to do it like this, and he did it like this. And there are many different explanations of what it means. But one answer, which I think fits very much in the vein of what we've been speaking about, is that means that he didn't change in the sense that what he did the first time he lit the menorah, which obviously would have been a very exciting thing to light the menorah for the first time in the Mishkan after all the years and Hashem didn't have a proper home in the world. And now finally there's a Beis HaMikdash, there's a Mishkan, and he goes to light the menorah for the first time. You can imagine the type of excitement, the type of passion that Aaron would have lit the menorah with the first time. Means that Aaron HaKohen somehow figured out how to hack the system, and how Shalosh Shina means that he didn't change from the first day to the second day to the third day to the fourth day. Every single day that Aaron lit the menorah was mamish like the first day. He found Chodesh. He figured out a way to be machle the regel minashah, to get rid of this kind of like, I said it too many times, this merry-go-round, this mundane kind of insane, never-ending Groundhog's Day, which Corona, we need Hanukkah bad. So I'll end with two brief thoughts, and then we'll say Hadron Olach for until next week. There's a Torah from the Sfas Emes that I heard from my brother, Moshe Tzvi. And I thought that you could add to it something based on the Gemara in Tamid. The Gemara in Tamid tells us that one of the first avodos in the Beis HaMikdash every single day. Tamid is a great mesechta. If you've never learned Tamid, it's an easy mesechta. It's a fun mesechta. It's good to learn with your kids. It's like a story of the ongoings of a day in the life of a Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash. It's a great mesechta. There's a lot of picture books on the Mishnayos also. And the Gemara is also nice and short. Anyway, so the Gemara describes very early on in the first parak how they would open up the, Alice in Wonderland hatch over there. They had this special key that you had to reach inside from the, there's like door on this, and they open it from the inside. They would go to that, and open it. They would enter into the heichal, and they would go in this kind of circle. They would go in this kind of circle. And they would check to make sure that everything was still in place, that nothing got knocked over by by the wind or by some rascally Kohen in the middle of the night to make sure everything was still in its proper place. When they got to this end of this circle, they would all face each other and they'd say, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. Everything is good. Shalom, Shalom, Hakol Shalom. Everything is peaceful in the mikdash. Everything is in its proper place. And then the Mishnah says at the very, very end, it says something very strange. And then it says after they did this circle, they would immediately dispatch people to go and start boiling up the water for the osei chavitin, for those who would bring the carbon chavitin. What's the carbon chavitin? So the Gemara says, do you mean to tell me that they would send people to go light up the fires and start boiling up the water that was going to be used for this carbon called the carbon chavitin? I thought, says the Gemara, that we have a pasuk that tells us in the Torah that the very first thing you have to do, the very first avoda every single day in the Beis HaMikdash has to be the carbon tamid. And the very last avoda that we do in the Beis HaMikdash has to be the carbon tamid. That the carbon tamid is the first thing we do in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash, and the very last thing we do there, the carbon tamid shel shachar, and the carbon tamid shel dein arbaim, and those are the two bookends of the entire avoda. So what are we doing with the carbon chavitin? And what is the carbon chavitin and what's going on here? So the Gemara says, no, don't worry. They didn't bring the carbon chavitin. They were just lighting up the water to boil up the water so that they'd be able to bring it. What is the carbon chavitin? The carbon chavitin is a daily mincha offering brought every single day in the Beis HaMikdash, brought by the Kohen Gadol. And the Sfas Emes points out that the carbon chavitin, this is the Sfas Emes that my brother pointed out to me many years ago. The Sfas Emes says that the carbon chavitin is the same as the Sfas Emes in Tafresh Mem Zayin, Parshas Tzav. The Minchas Chavitin is also called the Minchas Chinuch. What's the Minchas Chinuch? What's the carbon called the Minchas Chinuch? The Minchas Chinuch is the carbon which is brought by every Kohen. When I give you a Kohen, and it's your first time to walk into the Beis HaMikdash and to be able to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. But before you are able to do other types of avodas in the Beis HaMikdash, your inauguration carbon is called the Minchas Chinuch. That's why it's called the Minchas Chinuch. It's Chinuch milashon, it's your inaugural kind of like, they're hazing you to get into the Beis HaMikdash, to enter into the fraternity of the Kohanim. So the Minchas Chinuch is the same thing as the Minchas Chavitin. That which is the carbon which is brought the first time a Kohen serves in the Beis HaMikdash, says this Sfas Emes, is the exact same carbon of the Minchas Chavitin. If you look at the ingredients and the steps that are done, it's the exact same carbon. The Minchas Chavitin, however, is brought by the Kohen Gadol every single day. Because the Kohen Gadol, who's invested with this power of Aaron HaKohen Shalosh Shina, is the one who is telling us that even though every single day we're going to bring the same Tamid Shel Shachar and the same Tamid Shel Dein Arbayim, before we even begin the avoda of the day, which is bookended, of course, the first carbon we bring is the Tamid, and the last carbon we bring is the Tamid. Because you need the shuk. You need the shuk of davening 3 times a day and going through another Shachar Mincha Ma'ariv, another Shachar Mincha Ma'ariv, another Shachar Mincha Ma'ariv. And the same thing in the marketplace. Another day in the office, another day in the office, another day in the office, another day folding the laundry, the chulu. But before a Jew enters into that, before the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash begins, we begin to boil up the water for the Minchas Chavitin, as if to give the Kohanim a fresh set of glasses to say, look how the Kohen Gadol is able every single day to bring the exact same carbon, and yet to do it every single day, Shalosh Shina, to do it the same type of intensity. So we'll end with the Torah from the Kosover and a bracha that we should be zochet to see Mashiach soon. The Torah says in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, we find the Navi says that when Shaul and David HaMelech came together, so there was one day that David HaMelech didn't come to, we read this by Machras HaChodesh, we read this by the Haftorah for Erev Rosh Chodesh. Vayhi Machras HaChodesh, it was the next day, and David kept on not coming to the Suda. And Shaul says to Yonasan, he says to his advisors, and we'll end with this, he says, Madua lo ba ben Yishai, gam tmol gam hayom el alechem. Why hasn't David come to break bread with us today and yesterday and all these days, there's something going on. So that's the pshat. But the customer said, the way that you can read this, and I read it derech tefillah, is that the customer said, Madua lo ba ben Yishai? No, why is it that Ben Yishai hasn't come already? Why is it that Mashiach ben David hasn't come? Why is Ben Yishai still carrying and hasn't been here? Afal pishi yislam in kozeh achakalo. Gam tmol gam hayom. Because yesterday and today it's the same thing, over and over again. Gam tmol gam hayom. And the avodah of David HaMelech, is associated with Rosh Chodesh, with the ability to be mitchadesh, and that's very much deeply rooted in the Inyan of Chanukah. So Hashem should help us that we should be zocha to light the candles of Chanukah, like the Gemara says, haragil b'ner, someone who is ragil b'ner, their children become Talmidei Chacham. A Talmid Chacham is someone who is able to look at the same thing, the Nesiim, the parsha of the Nesiim, which is the same sukkim over and over again, and every single time to draw new life from it, which is zocha to be on the circles of life, the samach of life, and to ride it at BS. Well, it's said it from here,